Good afternoon. Thanks for joining. I'm Bob Giannino, President and CEO of United Way of Massachusetts Bay and Merrimack Valley. And I'm really pleased to be here with you today and grateful for all of you joining us for this important conversation. As I've joined United Way, I've aimed to make equity, inclusivity, and justice a centerpiece of my leadership and of our work. Marry that with the fact that today I sit here as the result of some very strong women in my life. And today's topic feels like the perfect one to launch our new DEI webinar series around. Over the last few years, we've seen two critical movements aimed at bringing overdue exposure to systemic injustices: the Me Too and racial reckoning movements. And those have accelerated a series of activities and conversations aimed at bringing greater equity and opportunity for so many people who have been systemically held back and held behind. I'm really proud that we're starting here as a result. And I know that you're in for a really thoughtful, engaging, and inspiring conversation today. I'm also really proud and excited to introduce our moderator for today's conversation. She's a good friend who I admire greatly and continue to be inspired by her and the work that she does. Bethia Carter is a national leader in the philanthropic sector who serves as the president and CEO of New England Blacks in Philanthropy. She's been a foundation leader, counseled philanthropists on their strategies, has advised Governor Baker on his engagement with the Black community, and she's even worked with our own United Way. But most importantly, she's a thoughtful, engaging leader that we are so fortunate to have in Greater Boston and here today to lead this conversation and to engage you in what I think will be a very compelling opportunity to hear from some incredible voices doing important work. So with that, I am proud to introduce you and hand things over to Bethia Carter.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much. I'm just so delighted to be here again. It's like I'm home. And thank you, Bob, for such a warm introduction. And thank you for being my friend over the years. I am truly excited about today's conversation. And Bob is right. I am returning home to the place of United Way, where I worked so many years on these issues of race and gender, as I used to head up the Today's Girls, Tomorrow's Leaders initiative. This issue is so important today as we think about the racial unrest, as we think about the pandemic, as we think about the sexual issues that have happened even past the past 4 years. This conversation is important of where Black Lives Matter meets the Me Too movement. This is the space that has been called to the forefront, this space of intersectionality, which answers the question, why race? Why gender? Why now? And there's no one better to have this conversation and help guide us through this thought than my friend, my sister friend, Dr. Regine Jean-Charles. Dr. Jean-Charles is a feminist literary scholar and activist who's been working on these issues for a number of years, the past 20 years, these issues that are surrounding the rape culture, and also how do we process and deal with these issues. She's currently the Associate Professor of French and African Diaspora Studies at Boston College. Her scholarship and teaching on world literatures in French includes work on Black France, Sub-Saharan Africa, Haiti, and the Haitian diaspora. She teaches classes on race and gender like Where Black Lives Matter Meets Me Too and Black Feminism 101. She holds a BA from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's and PhD from Harvard University. She has received numerous fellowships, including from the likes of the Ford Foundation, Mellon Mays Foundation, and the Woodrow Wilson Foundation. Her first book, Conflict Bodies, the politics of rape representation in the Francophile imaginary, examines theoretical, visual, and literary texts in order to challenge the dominant views of sexual violence. She has authored academics books such as Looking for Other Worlds, Black Feminism, Literary Ethics, and the Haitian Fiction. And her most recent book, which I all urge you to purchase, A Trumpet of Conscience for the 21st Century. Much of Dr. Jean-Charles' activism and lectures have focused on educating, inspiring, mobilizing young people to end violence against girls and women. Dr. Jean-Charles is a regular lecturer and contributor to media outlets like the Boston Globe, GBH, American magazines, and others too numerous to mention, where she has weighed in on these topics and really taken the thought of Me Too and Black Lives Matter and put it in a way that even laymen can understand these issues and how it affects our community and the Haitian diaspora. Today, she and her students will provide an intergenerational and intersectional view of Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and how it impacts our communities. So, without further ado, Dr. Jean-Charles will speak first, then she will be followed by emerging scholars under her mentorship, Grace Asaba, Balaji Barry, Latifa Odetunde, and Talia Pierre-Louis, who are all current juniors at Boston College. I am delighted to bring forth and honored to present my friend, my sister, Dr. Jean-Charles.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bethia, for that wonderful introduction. It is really an honor and a privilege for me to be here with all of you today. And thank you. I want to say a special thank you also to Karen Gross-Haran, also my sister and fellow Milton neighbor. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I also, before I speak, want to honor the land that I stand on. I'm here at my home in Milton, where the Wampanoag people first inhabited this land. I honor our Native brothers and sisters and remember their genocide. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. All right, here we are. All right. So today I'm here to talk to you about the intersection of where Black Lives Matter meets Me Too, one of my very favorite subjects. Before I begin, I would like to do something called survivor acknowledgement. We know that the numbers in this world, the statistics are that 1 in 3 women will be raped in her lifetime. That means that ostensibly some of you watching have been victimized by sexual violence, or perhaps one of your loved ones have been. It could be a friend, it could be a parent, a sibling, a child. And I want to just acknowledge that because the materials that I'll be discussing today could be triggering as we talk about the movement to end sexual violence. Inevitably, that could bring up some memories for people. And I want to just point you to 2 amazing resources. The first is RAINN.org, which you see here on the left, and the other is the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, which I have the privilege of having worked with personally. It's a wonderful organization. So I encourage you, please, to look at those resources. And I know that your HR departments over at United Way will also have more resources available for you. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. All Black lives matter. Black women's lives matter. Black non-binary lives matter. Black men's lives matter. Black trans lives matter. Black children's lives matter. Black lives matter. Black girls' lives matter. Our lives matter. I begin with this refrain because its utterance must never be taken lightly. It is sacred. It is a statement that is also a rallying cry. It is an affirmation of life and a declaration that although racism is indeed the air that we breathe, our breath is sacred. This refrain is a call, a cry, a communal response, a reflection, a celebration, and an invitation. Black Lives Matter represents one of the most important statements about the status of racial justice in the 21st century. It is a simple affirmation whose necessity reveals the kind of world that we live in. To understand that all Black lives do matter is to appreciate intersectionality, the idea that oppressions interrelate, and to comprehend the depths of the struggle against anti-Blackness in the United States and abroad. When we say Black Lives Matter, we affirm Black life and recognize a humanity that too often has been denied throughout history through to the present day. Black Lives Matter should not be necessary to speak, but given the continuous cycle of anti-Black violence, racist abuse, and the stronghold of white supremacy, we say it, we scream it, and we teach it over and over again. I have been teaching about the importance of Black life throughout my entire academic career, but in the past 2 years in particular, by teaching this class where hashtag Black Lives Matter meets hashtag #MeToo, violence and representation in the African diaspora, teaching this class has reinvigorated my commitment to affirming Black life and humanity and highlighted to me the necessity of looking at Black Lives Matter through an intersectional lens. During the first week of our class, I asked our students to read June Jordan's poem About My Rights, aloud in front of their peers. The poem, written in 1978 by Black feminist poet, essayist, and playwright June Jordan, connects the speaker's personal history of rape to a public narrative about violence that is global, informed by social justice, and born of multiple oppressions. The magnificent conclusion of Poem About My Rights, in which the speaker narrates her private pain as a rape survivor, reinforces the idea that histories of violence are raced, gendered, intertwined, and embodied. Oh, I just heard that my slides are not coming through. I'm sorry. Hi. Does that work now? Can everybody see that? Oh, I guess you can tell me. All right. Does that work now? Excellent. Okay, sorry about that. Well, the first one was the slide with the information for RAINN, RAINN.org. The second slide said Black Lives Matter, and so here we are on the third slide, which is actually the goals of our class stated here. All right, so I'll go back to talking about June Jordan's Poem About My Rights, in which she narrates her private pain as a rape survivor. The poem concludes like this, quote, "I am the history of rape. I am the history of the rejection of who I am. I am the history of the terrorized incarceration of myself. I have been raped because I have been wrong, the wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin, the wrong nose, the wrong hair, the wrong need, the wrong dream, the wrong geographic, the wrong sartorial eye. I have been the meaning of rape. I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. My name is my own, my own, my own." Jordan's riveting conclusion establishes the subject of the poem who takes up space. She occupies space as a survivor, a commentator on social justice, a poet, and a Black woman who understands how global networks of power such as capitalism and patriarchy calibrate her lived experience. She takes up space through the metaphoric use of I and my own. This gesture disrupts the idea of Black women as owned, whether they are forced into that position through the legacy of chattel slavery or the heteropatriarchal structure of the family. The poet creates a space for Black women rape survivors to own their existence within the stanza of the poem. It emblematizes what my colleague, the sociologist Sean McGuffey, and I intended when we created this class. With June Jordan's poem in mind, we invite our students to begin the journey of transforming rape culture. That is at the heart of the class's mission. Our course content is geographically diverse and intentionally global. We explore the problem of rape culture in multiple contexts based in the United States, the Caribbean, and on the African continent. It is interdisciplinary in form, and we deployed methodologies from both the humanities and the social sciences. Our goal is to approach rape culture not only as a complex problem, but an urgent problem that is global. And we came to the class with the explicit goal of equipping students to imagine solutions for intervening in and eradicating rape culture, with constant attention to how intersectionality operates in gender-based violence. According to the editors of the collection, quote, "Transforming a rape culture involves imaginative leaps from our present state of institutionalized violence to a future that is safer and more just." We must summon our imaginations for this task because history and society have so few precedents for us. Transforming a rape culture is about changing fundamental attitudes and values. Taking this statement seriously, our students not only learned about the wide-ranging manifestations and ramifications of rape culture and the academic approaches to examining it, but they were also asked to summon their imaginations to envision a world without sexual violence and consider how to challenge the norms that perpetuate rape culture. The imagination, the ability to dream, or as the theorist Ashawn Crawley, to quote, Ashawn Crawley calls it, quote, to imagine otherwise, is an essential ingredient in the work of transformation. By imagining a world without sexual violence, our students are encouraged to envision and work towards a more just world. To achieve these goals, we assign critical readings from sociology, literary, and cultural studies. We read academic articles, we read novels, we read poetry, we watch films, we do a lot throughout the semester. And we ask questions like, how do historicized, racialized, sexualized, and gendered tropes help us to understand the responses to sexual assaults today? Why is rape culture so pervasive around the world? How do writers represent rape in their fiction? What is the relationship between rape and representation? The development of these questions and their answers that the students come up with are encouraged to respond to are central to our mission of the class. And so today, that's all I'll say about the class, but I will say a little bit more about these two movements. These two movements, Black Lives Matter and Me Too, to give you a background for those who aren't familiar with it. And I want to start by talking about Black Lives Matter as a movement that began with love. When Alicia Garza first used the phrase Black Lives Matter in 2013, after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin, it was in a love letter to Black people. She wrote, quote, "We don't deserve to be killed with impunity. We need to love ourselves and fight for a world where Black lives matter. Black people, I love you. I love us. We matter. Our lives matter. Black lives matter." It was a love letter that launched a movement. What does it mean that love was the genesis of Black Lives Matter? And how often do we actually think about that? It's actually not a far leap. According to the philosopher and public intellectual Cornel West, we must never forget that, quote, "justice is what love looks like in public," end quote. Led by an abiding love for all of humanity, the founders of Black Lives Matter have worked to make sure that the lives of Black people are just as valuable as the lives of others. As described by the creators of the movement, Black Lives Matter is an ideology and an intervention. It is, quote, "an ideological and political intervention in a world where Black lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. It is an affirmation of Black folks' humanity, our contributions to the society, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression," end quote. Black Lives Matter is a network, it is a movement, it is an ideology, it is an intervention intended to transform minds and societies. A few days after publishing her love letter to Black people on social media, Alicia Garza reflected further on what it means to say matter. She wrote, "Black Lives Matter is the collective affirmation and embracing of Black people. It is a reminder and a demand that our lives be cherished, respected, and able to access our full dignity and determination. It is a truth that we are called to embrace as a society, if our society is to become human again," end quote. The impact of embracing and defending the value of Black life has the potential to lift us all. What we know today is that Black Lives Matter began as a movement due to the combined efforts of these three women that you see right now on the screen: Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza. These women were activists. They were seasoned. I always tell my students they were seasoned activists. They didn't just wake up and start Black Lives Matter. They had been organizing, working in labor movements, working in the movement to end gender-based violence, working with immigrants' rights for years before they began they founded this movement. Two of the women are queer. One is of Nigerian descent. Their backgrounds are also important because it's good for us to remember that when we say all Black Lives Matter, that positionality is part of it. In fact, we know that although Black Lives Matter has mostly become visible to us through the symbolic importance of Black men who were killed by police, the women who began this movement did not intend for that to be the main objective. They always saw the movement as one that was global and that was one for all Black lives, whether those people are women, men, non-binary, or transgender, or children. A study of the history of Black Lives Matter makes clear that if we were to understand the movement properly, we have to see it as an intervention as well as an ideology, and that we have to look at it intersectionally. I love this slide that you see here because this is actually a mural that was made by some of our students at Boston College. This mural was made by students in the class of 2024, the class that are this year in their first year. And as part of the class, each of the students have to go to a different lab. And so one of the labs is an art lab. And this year, the students in that art lab decided to make this mural featuring the three founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the founder of the Me Too movement, Tarana Burke, that's there in the yellow. And they put on the top, "Go forth and set the world aflame," which is the motto of Boston College. We know that Boston College has much to learn from the organizers of Black Lives Matter and Me Too. I'm going to shift because I want to make sure I have enough time. And I'm going to talk a bit now about the founding of the Me Too movement, which people might know a little bit less about. In the 21st century, we see how despite the inclusive origins of the Black Lives Matter movement, Black women and girls are often forgotten in the cause. The astonishing gender gap in how we mobilize against racial violence has long been addressed by activists like Kimberly Crenshaw, Aisha Shaida Simmons, and Tarana Burke. Although it was catapulted into fame in 2017, the Me Too movement began with Tarana Burke's work in the late 1990s. I'm gonna skip over that. Me Too grew out of her work with young girls. As an activist and organizer around the country, Tarana Burke did extensive work to help young people in marginalized communities. While she was working at a youth camp in Alabama, there was a 13-year-old girl with whom she became very close. During a private conversation between the two, the girl disclosed that she was a survivor of sexual violence. Tarana Burke's response was not what one would expect from an internationally known advocate for survivors and warrior against sexual violence. Rather than embrace the girl, she rejected her and sent her to someone else. That moment of rejection continued to haunt her because the girl never came back to camp. And this reminds me of what I always tell students: the most important thing you can do when a survivor discloses to you is tell them that you believe them and listen to them and not tell them what to do. Feeling incredibly guilty about her reaction, Tarana Burke said, "Why couldn't I just have said Me Too?" And so she used that idea of Me Too as an animating force behind the movement she founded. Me Too is also part of the framework that she calls empowerment through empathy. She tapped into this in order to understand why it is difficult for people to see themselves in survivors. She challenged people to learn to say Me Too and to use empathy as a point of departure for changing the conversation about rape culture. Describing how she founded the movement, Tarana Burke explains, quote, "Me Too is so powerful because somebody said it to me and it changed the trajectory of my healing process once I heard it. Me Too was about reaching the places that other people wouldn't go, bringing messages and words and encouragement to survivors of sexual violence where other people wouldn't be talking about it," end quote. Now, the more popular story about Me Too that folks are more familiar with is that in October of 2016, Alyssa Milano posted a question on social media. "Raise your hand," she said, "if you've ever been sexually assaulted or harassed, and respond with Me Too." Alyssa Milano's tweet resonated with women all over the world, not just women, men, boys, and girls all over the world. In just hours, the hashtag had gone viral, and the organization responsible for the genesis of the founding of Me Too by Tarana Burke was quickly forgotten. Now, afterwards, thankfully, that was rectified. What's interesting is that this began after a number of Hollywood celebrities began with the allegations against producer Harvey Weinstein. That was in 2015. So again, we see the patterns of this movement, right? Where Black women, even though they were at the helm of this movement or have been doing this work for a very long time, they were erased from that. Now, although we like to talk about the histories of these movements, these are just some slides that I had here to explain to you what intersectionality is. And I guess I'll say, this is why it's actually very important for us to understand and to look at Black Lives Matter through an intersectional lens, because it helps us to see why gender is important, why sexuality is important, and that multiple oppressions intersect, overlap, and exacerbate one another. That term, intersectionality, was first created by the legal scholar Kimberlé Crenshaw in 1989. And I love this definition here because this is a definition that, not the original definition she had, but it's a definition that she used in an interview with Time magazine a couple of years ago. And she says, it's basically a lens, a prism for seeing the ways in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. We tend to talk about race inequality as separate from inequality based on gender, class, sexuality, or immigrant status. What's often missing is how some people are subject to all of these, and that experience is not just the sum of its parts. And so intersectionality, when we say that we're looking at the intersection of Black Lives Matter and Me Too, what we're trying to home in on is that intersectionality and the need for us to look at both movements intersectionally. One of the most important examples of why that intersectional lens is necessary is in how we remember even and commemorate people that have been killed by police. So we're familiar with so many names, like we're familiar of names like George Floyd, of course. We know the names of Philando Castile. We know the names of Trayvon Martin. We know the names of so many men. But how many of us can name names of women, perhaps other than Breonna Taylor, who've been killed by police? And although in 2020, we saw that Breonna Taylor was put in the spotlight, the fact of the matter is that there are many Black women, sadly, that have been killed by police for whom we don't know their names. Names like Rekia Boyd, names like Kian Livingston, names like Eleanor Bumpers, names like Chantel Davis, names like Tanisha Anderson. And this is why Kimberlé Crenshaw actually also began Say Her Name, which is an initiative that's under the umbrella of Black Lives Matter, which resists police brutality against Black women. And I encourage you, please, to Google Say Her Name and go to their website, because they have a wonderful archive. They have wonderful videos. They have gathered the mothers of some of these women who were killed, and they have a beautiful testimonial video where they talk about the society that they founded to support one another. And so we can look at Say Her Name as an example of why the intersectional lens to Black Lives Matter changes our thinking. When Kimberlé Crenshaw initiated the movement that became Say Her Name, it was a 21st century campaign to show that Black women were victimized by police. She did so with intention. She saw how infrequently Black women were killed by police and decided then to place them at the center of collective organizing. The purpose of Say Her Name is to amplify the problem of Black women being killed by police. Quote, Black women and girls as young as 7 and as old as 93 have been killed by police, though we rarely know their names. Knowing their names is a necessary but not sufficient condition for lifting up their stories, which in turn provides a much clearer view of the wide-ranging circumstances that make Black women's bodies to police violence. One of my favorite assignments that I give to my students during the semester is having them go to this Say Her Name website and find someone and do research about someone who is listed here to learn more about them. And what they find time and time again is that for most of these women, there is not that much information out there. To be clear, it is not that the women who began Black Lives Matter were not inclusive in their approach. It was that the public response, outcry, and mobilization in the protest against Black death foregrounded men and boys. This is why we need an intersectional lens, because so few people are familiar with Rekia Boyd, Jessica Hampton, or Ayanna Stanley Jones. Although Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor have risen to prominence, the fact is that they are the exception. No vision for racial justice is complete without an attention to intersectionality. As Scheherazade Tillet puts it for too many Black women and girls, quote, "There is a grief knowing that your stories will not be central to the movement," end quote. So these examples show us that Black women have always defended Black women. And as early as 1966, when Abby Lincoln asked the question, "Who will revere the Black women?" posed in an essay for Essence magazine, we know that Black women have been doing that work. And so I say to my students also, even though we're shedding light in the 21st century on Black Lives Matter, on Me Too, on Say Her Name, Black women have actually been doing this work for centuries. We could go all the way back to the work of Ida B. Wells, for example, who was working as a journalist and brought to light the fact that Black women were also being raped and being lynched. She's known for her anti-lynching campaigns, but what we don't realize is how much work she actually did to amplify the stories and the voices of Black women. We could go back to people like Ella Baker, who told us that strong people don't need strong leaders, and who was always collective and collaborative in her approach to organizing. Ella Baker also famously said, "Give light and the people will find the way." Ella Baker taught us that what you have to do is empower people. Focus on the collaborative, which is exactly what we try to do in our classes as well. We could go back to someone like Fannie Lou Hamer, who said nobody's free until everybody's free, because she understood that all Black lives matter, and that if we were to focus on the least of these, we would be able to uplift the entire world. We could go back to Angela Davis, who actually is a mentor to many of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, who said you have to act as if it were possible to transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. And so I'm going to end here because I want to pass the mic to my students. So, Angela Davis, you have to act as though if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. What we try to do in our teaching of Black Lives Matter and #MeToo, and encouraging students to think about the intersection of racial violence and gender-based violence, and equipping students to look intersectionally at every freedom movement in order to advance racial justice through an intersectional lens. What we try to do is encourage them to not just be citizens of the world, but to be transformers of the world. And so I'm so thrilled to introduce to you 4 of those transformers. These are 4 women who are in Boston College class of 2022. They're juniors. They graduate last year. Next year they'll graduate. They were, when they're in their first year 2 years ago, they all took our class. And then this year they actually served as what we call junior teaching fellows. So they were mentors to the first year students who took the class this year. And so I'm very pleased to introduce to you once again, Grace Asogba, Dilgisa Berry, Latifa Odetunde, and Talia Pierre-Louis. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Latifa Odetunde. I'm, as was stated, a junior at Boston College, double majoring in both sociology and African diaspora studies, and taking the course #Black Lives Matter meets #MeToo my freshman year in 2018 had a major impact on my development as a person and as an activist, where it's helped me redefine activism. It's pushed me to unpack my own negative internalizations of the oppressive structures that exist and embark on a journey of healing that I did not know yet I was on until later in my college career. So to sort of guide you into how this course was able to impact me in these varied ways, we have got to talk about Black women. So let's talk about them, right? So Black women are conditioned to equate their worth and value to the amount of impact they can make and the amount of change that they can produce. And this was something that I was not aware of until taking this course. I was not aware that as a Black woman, I stood at the intersections of both racism and patriarchy, and of the various ways in which these oppressive structures manifested. One manifestation that does hit close to home is the strong Black woman narrative that claims Black women are strong beings that can withstand all pain. And it's something that I had internalized within my own years in both high school and college, where perfectionism took a major toll on my mental health. But this dangerous caricature ignores the humanity of Black women. It says to Black pregnant women who are in pain and feel that they are dying that they're just overthinking. It says to Black women who have been raped, who endure domestic violence, that they'll just get over it and that they'll just be okay. It's what pushes Black women to believe that in order to matter, they need to do it all. But let's be real. Black women have been doing this work. They are always doing and leading this work of dismantling oppressive structures, but they're not given the chance to breathe because they're supposed to be quote unquote strong. And like I had mentioned, I believe that I had to be strong and that my activism had to be the loudest or the most visible in order to make an impact and to be of worth and to matter. But taking this course my freshman year had let me know that that was false. And it let me know that as Latifah alone, I mattered despite what I was involved in. So in essence, I had not known that I was invisibilized, and taking this course helped me realize along the way that I implicitly was trying to gain visibility and existence within society through being over-involved and spreading myself too thin. But I had not seen it as a problem because as a Black woman, that made me strong. Overall, the course #Black Lives Matter meets #MeToo helped me break all of this down, where it pushed me to unpack my multiple identities and reflect about who I am and what I wanted to give out to the world. It taught me about intersectionality as a framework, which Professor John Charles has let us know was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And most importantly, it emphasized the need to digest radical self-love, because how can you do this work of activism and spreading love to others if your own cup is empty and you don't fully love your own self? So if we're to take a step back and reflect on my own development, I came into Boston College and focused primarily on my Blackness in the ways in which racism affected me. But after taking this course, my focus widened where I was both Black and a woman and realized, okay, well, patriarchy has now entered the chat. But then there was one identity missing that needed to start its journey of unpacking, and that was being a Muslim and understanding Islamophobia. So in essence, #Black Lives Matter meets #MeToo provided me with the tools to help me analyze what it meant to be a Black Muslim woman. And the course was something that I used as a resource once I began my sophomore year. So as a Muslim attending Boston College, I felt lonely within my journey and experienced a void in non-Black Muslim communities where I felt that I did not exist. So I turned to research and conducted a study on the identity development of Black African Muslim women and interviewed about 10 women and gathered that I go through life with a triple consciousness. Throughout the course, #Black Lives Matter meets #MeToo, we had read tons of research studies on Black women and the ways in which they are vulnerable to gender-based violence. And reading those works were impactful to me. So I took that tool of research and did the same to heal and understand what it meant to be a Muslim in relation to my other identities. Therefore, education became my form of activism, where I felt extremely fulfilled. But it didn't stop there. I then transformed my research into a digital platform called Black Muslim TV. So BMTV, which is the acronym for Black Muslim TV, is a digital space and channel series that centers the voices of Black Muslims through interviews and gives them the space to share their stories and experiences. And you can find these episodes of Black Muslim TV on Instagram at Black Muslim TV. So it was due to this course my freshman year that pushed me to dive deeper into myself. It helped me redefine what activism was and how I wanted to form community and create change. And I can say in confidence today that I feel grounded in who I am as a person and as a Black Muslim woman and as an activist, and that I've taken the time to pour into myself so then I could genuinely create change within my community. And I feel that my purpose in life is to use my passion for education to raise awareness on the Black Muslim community. And I plan to do this through research, through the entertainment industry with BMTV, and through the classroom, since I also see myself as a professor creating the change in that way too. And I have to give my thanks to the course #Black Lives Matter meets #MeToo for giving me the strength, the confidence, and the affirmation that I'm capable of doing all of that. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bilgisa Berry. I am a junior here. I'm double majoring in international studies and African diaspora studies. Um, as Latifa has mentioned, and Professor, I had the honor of taking this class as a freshman with these three beautiful women, and then the chance to also be a junior teaching assistant with them as well. So today I want to talk to you all about joy and impact. Um, so on October 7th, there was civil unrest going on in Guinea, which is where I am from in West Africa, due to the president seeking a third controversial term, which he had won. As a response, citizens went out and protested for their basic human rights due to the election results that a lot of people did not agree with. People's protests were met with brute force by the government and armed forces. As a response, more than 90 people were killed, women were raped, um, and people's homes were broken into, and a lot of people ended up getting violated. Um, and as a response to this, as a person that was at BC and having family members that were amongst the victims of this violence, I took it upon myself to plan a protest to raise awareness about everything that was going on over there. Um, as a woman at Boston College, I found it my responsibility, although I wasn't there, to bring this this problem that was going on across the world in here in our own background, and to make sure that people are aware of things that are going on across the world. Now, in Black Lives Matter to Me Too, we learned not only about the problems going on here, but also the gender-based violence and also the police brutality, the government brutality that is going on all around the world. So these two movements are not just US based, they are global. And taking this class gave me the tools to see it in that framework. And as an international studies major, this was important for me to do. And it was an important realization to know that I could apply the tools that I was learning in a Boston College classroom across the globe. Now, how do we maintain joy throughout all of this, through the Black Lives Matter movement, through the Me Too movement, through everything that we saw unravel across the world, like the NSARS movement in Nigeria, and so many others across the continent and across the world? So this is a question that we were posed first as a freshman, and that the students in the class that we were junior teaching assistants to. How do you maintain joy in work that is full of it can drown you in sorrowness, but an important part of activism is also knowing that we have to maintain what keeps us happy, we have to maintain our joy, and we have to cultivate it. And this is something that is an ever-growing process. It is active and is subjective to the person that is doing this activism. So for me, I would like to give an example. The way I maintain joy is through my community, having these three women to call sisters, and knowing that I could talk to them about anything, and knowing that we share things like our music, like our dancing, like food. Those are always that I cultivate joy every day. So I would like to just highlight this importance, even though joy can be something that's seen as so simple, but it's just something that's such a powerful tool, that it is an act of resistance for all of us. And it is what keeps us going. It is what keeps us ever evolving. And it's what keeps me involved in this work every day. Joy gives me hope, and it gives me faith that all the work I'm doing is going to result in a world that is rape culture free, that is gender-based violence free, that is racial violence free. So these are all things that, for me, I cultivate through my achievements and what I do, and I put all that work into it and know that it's gonna be there for the long run, and it's gonna keep me going. And just like having hope is to see something in a better term. And I feel like this is what Professor Regine Jean-Charles has taught me in the classroom. It's knowing that the work you are doing is not for nothing, and knowing that the work you are doing will give results, and that one day this world will be of rape culture free. So I encourage everyone in all the work we do to maintain the joy, to maintain your happiness, to maintain everything that keeps you going and keeps the work that we all do continuous. And it's so important. And it's also the way that I feel like it's the way that we impact others, and that we show them that it is possible to do this and still have a life where you have happiness. Like, all of that is possible. So yeah, that was my speech on cultivating joy and keeping it, and know that it has an impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much to my peers and to Professor Jean-Charles for sharing. My name is Talia Pierre-Louis. I'm a junior here at Boston College, double majoring in applied psychology and African diaspora studies. Today, I wanted to touch upon the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement, but in a more global context. Talking about these topics and applying the tools in the context of the US is important. But if I did not do this sort of critical thinking and apply them to a more international aim, I would be doing a very important part of my intersectional identity a disservice. For me, sharing the identities of being Black and being a woman were just not enough for me to do the work that I do. As a first generation Haitian American who has had the opportunity to travel back home to Jacmel, Haiti every year, my culture is a large part of my identity and a large part of my career focus and things that I want to focus on in the future. And as a student, something that is very important to me is applying what I have learned in the classroom into real world settings. And the class where Black Lives Matter meets Me Too had taught me just that. As everyone has said before, I had the honor to take this class with these three beautiful women and Professor Jean-Charles and Professor McGuffey. Specifically in the course, we had a unit that looked at geography, and it had focus on various locations in the Black Atlantic and how these two movements, the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement, had manifested. And when we did that unit, suddenly I knew where I wanted to take my activism. In the past, I went to predominantly white high school as well. So I was one of 6 Black women in a school population that was about 500 kids. So I was super activist, leading protests, writing petitions, and it kind of burnt me out in college. Trying to figure out who I am as a person and trying to figure out who I am as an activist. I felt like coming into college, we have that singular idea of what an activist is, but taking this class really broadened my horizons and made me think about activism in a different way. So all of that was freshman year, but how does it apply now? I also had the opportunity to be a junior teaching fellow with these women, and I was able to sit through the class content and think about it where I am as a junior and where I am after, what has happened through the pandemic and like my experiences just through life. In the past year on social media, you probably have seen hashtags like Justice for George Floyd, Justice for Breonna Taylor. But in my content, in my news feeds, I was seeing hashtags such as Pray for Guinea, End SARS, Congo is Bleeding, La Vida es Negra es Important, and La Vie Noire Important, which are international movements in Guinea, Nigeria, Congo, Dominican Republic, and Spanish-speaking countries, and in Haiti, respectively. When these movements were at their height, I had to analyze the media I was taking in, and I had to make sense of how these predominantly Black countries are facing issues of anti-Blackness and misogynoir, just like the United States was. It's something, being a child of an immigrant, my mom talks about, her experiences growing up in a dictatorship under Duvalier in Haiti, and then her talking about, Aristide And the coup d'etat that happened, and all the police brutality that was happening in Haiti, and all the gender-based violence that was happening at the time as well. And I just couldn't understand. Like, I'm here and I'm thinking it's just America that has these issues, but it's not. And these issues, though they might be similar, they're not the same. I had to put the pieces together, and then it clicked. It was the effects of colonialism, imperialism, racism, sexism, and overexploitation that had put the countries in the state that they are in now. In that moment, I had to take a deep breath. I had to say, okay, first of all, Black Lives Matter. All Black Lives Matter, not just in the US. I had to say, I believe you. I believe victim survivors. I believe survivors of gender-based violence. I believe survivors of those who have faced rape as a war crime, because that's very real in these countries as well. And instead of being discouraged, I had to sit back and envision a more just world. And I had to ask myself a couple of questions. A, how do we get here? How do we fix this? Where does our work start? What resources do we use? Can we do this work being where we are in the diaspora? Some of these questions still remain unanswered for me, but I'm willing to do whatever work it takes in order to get closer to these responses. So overall, the class where Black Lives Matter meets me too, and my professors not only taught me more about my identity and how I navigate society as a first generation, a child of an immigrant, someone who's Black, a woman, but both the class and my professors planted the seed of activism that was specifically tailored to me, focusing on advocacy and education in Haiti to uplift all Black lives, men's lives, women's lives, queer lives, and children's lives in my mother's land, my ancestors' land, Haiti Sheli. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Grace Asopa. I'm a junior at Boston College studying international studies with a concentration in ethics and social justice and a minor in African and African diaspora studies. And oftentimes when I look to negotiate the beauty and the complexity of the class and the work that I've immersed myself with, whether it be the readings, the authors that I've come to know, and many of the cultural architects that I now pull wisdom from, it is all due to my present understanding that social impact has been rooted in the struggle for self-actualization. And I think that when we look to, do this work at the intersection between Black Lives Matter to Me Too, it's understanding that for me, I found peace in my transnational perspective of the world, because I've been given the tools to self-define and self-determine a world where the structural domains of power can operate much differently than that of generations before. And so something that I took away was really this understanding of fostering oppositional knowledge. And oppositional knowledge, as defined by Patricia Hill Collins in Black Feminist Thought, is a type of knowledge that's developed for or in defense of an oppressed group's interests. Ideally, it fosters the group's self-definition and self-determination. And self-definition meaning the power to name one's reality, self-determination meaning the power to decide one's own destiny. And so when I look to fostering oppositional knowledge and, expanding my activism and expanding the work that I wanted to do because of the course my freshman year I realized that what I was given to go out into the world to do and to be of service to people was this toolbox. And I think it's important, people often talk about, the tools of these movements and, what does it mean and how does it actually, help us to foster that knowledge, was understanding that, these are the tools that help us to construct our identities and reinforce oppositional knowledge. So that when we go out into the world as disruptors, as storytellers, as frontline responders, as healers, as artists, we can bridge the gap. We can reprogram ourselves so that we can empower other people and other communities and generations to feel the agency and have the opportunity to amplify those that have been voiceless. And so in doing so, December after I had taken the course in fall of 2018, I decided to start a digital media platform called Vintage. And Vintage is a Gen Z focused digital media platform that looks to amplify the voices of Black and Indigenous people of color through social campaigns, but also digital storytelling. And Bilgisa is actually our events coordinator, and Talia is actually our outreach coordinator. And so when I looked to integrating this idea of digital storytelling with oppositional knowledge, with Black Lives Matter means Me Too, and realizing these toolboxes that were given us, it was understanding that, you know, in social campaigns, we can find that agency, and realizing that, you know, for the tables that have been created and for all of these things that, you know, we want to break down, whether it be, you know, the existence of social movements as they are now, whether it be the integration of capitalism in our communities, it's by giving people the opportunity and finding in ourselves that, you know, we can really create those tables that may not have been afforded to us in the past. And when we do so, we can invite other people to sit with us and to tell their own stories. And so through Vintage, we've been able to, you know, have campaigns like the Still I Rise campaign that, you know, touched on women in the world where we need to say her name, so the Breonna Taylors and the Oluwatoyin Salus. And we had the opportunity to feature a young Black woman from the Carolinas that, you know, shifted narratives with the creation of the modern day Black alphabet book, Ariel Robinson. Whether it was, you know, now with the creation of Judas and the Messiah, we had the opportunity to, you know, feature a woman who was a Barnard class of 2020 graduate whose family had actually worked a lot with Fred Hampton. And she detailed the complexities of Black ownership and capitalism, and sharing her senior thesis with us that talked about, you know, the intersection of the Black Lives Matter movement, but also gentrification in West Harlem and the realities of eminent domains and institutions and the work that they do towards harming our communities. It was because of BLM to Me Too that I was able to go to Paris and, you know, talk to so many amazing women that were fostering the Afrofeminist movement and thus the Black feminist movement globally. And I was able to sit with them and really understand what it looked like to build a movement, the emergence of a movement that, you know, had been positioned by BLM, that had been positioned by Me Too to something far more greater than we could have possibly ever imagined. And so I think for me, it's just having the opportunity to foster oppositional knowledge in this way, to foster self-definition, to foster self-determination has, you know, been because of this platform that we've created, but also with the realization that digital technology and digital storytelling are means to transform all the things that, you know, we may not have known in the past, but for all the things that we hope for in the future. And, you know, the New York Times had reported that Black Lives Matter movement was maybe the largest movement in US history. And I think that to live in that time where digital technology and social media has enabled us to really expose and strategically dismantle false narratives is a power that is accessible not only to us, but to everyone. And so I think that that's important because you do so while giving agency to the people. You do so while keeping institutions accountable. And that's just one example of the ways in which the intersections of technology and digital activism can impact you from one course to so many other people in the world. And it is truly because of Vintage and the work that we do that we've been able to, you know, reach hundreds of thousands of people with our social, you know, graphic campaigns, whether it be the End SARS movement, whether it be what was happening 72 hours after George Floyd, and so many of the content that we've created. Because of that, we've been able to have a forum on leadership and healing and the intersections of sexual assault. And so I think for me, as you know, Cornel West said, like, we have to try again, we have to fail again, and we have to fail better. And that's truly the message of oppositional knowledge that we've learned, not only from this course, for me, but also from these movements, is that we are in this transition period of trying again, of failing again, and knowing that, you know, we can always fail better. And I think that to truly be able to foster that self-definition, that self-determination, that oppositional knowledge for yourself, is understanding that if you have the means to do so, we have to continue to empower and give resources to those whose stories are often led untold. We have to continue to empower and give resources to the stories that we may have thought have been told a certain way in history, but really we weren't giving agency to the people, you know, that were left unsaid to do so. And so when I look at the impact of BLM to Me Too on my trajectory, on the things I've been created, and this idea of, you know, racial solidarity, but also immortalizing and creating movements that last generations and teach the next generation that they truly have the means to create whatever it is that they want to, it's looking at oppositional knowledge. It's looking to understand that, you know, we have the power to create our own reality, that we have the power to decide our own destiny away from white supremacy, away from sexism, away from patriarchy, away from misogynoir. And oftentimes we have the power to create our own destiny towards a more anti-racist future, towards a more safer future. And so I definitely implore you, as BLM to Me Too has, you know, given me the toolbox to do so, to always look to empower and give resources to, you know, those that are often left voiceless, give resources to, you know, and platforms to those that often resist the talking of race, but believe in this hope for change.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was so inspiring, enlightening. I just really appreciate this scholarly conversation. And, you know, as I look at you four women, I cannot wait until you become a professor and that my daughter can actually take one of your courses. I am truly looking forward to that day. You have brought an amazing sort of asset-based understanding to where we are today. Love, joy, uplifting us. How are we using our gifts? You know, those are all the things that we're considering. So right now we're going to open up the conversation to the audience. If you have a question, please, please, please share it, and we will get your question on screen. But while we're waiting for questions to come in, you know, my pen is burning up here, my fingers, I'm typing. There's just so much I want to discuss. So let's start with the obvious. You know, the lens that you brought here today is not the usual space and place that United Way is used to talking or discussing issues. In addition, we rarely have an intergenerational conversation about these topics. So, you know, as we think about how United Way supports youth development, particularly the mantra of having a caring adult who was usually raised in the 20th century, try to mentor people that are in the 21st century or parenting people in the 21st century. What do you think we need to be conscious of regarding today's conversation, particularly around race, gender, and intersectionality? Dr. Jean-Charles, I'm going to start with you, and then I am interested in my younger scholars also sharing.
I know, I was happy to let them lead the way with answering that. I know for me, it's definitely a constant struggle. And I always say that I learn from my mentees as much as I am able to impart knowledge to them. And this is in all areas, this is from when, a few of these women, I taught a class in Paris 2 summers ago, and a few of them, actually, most of them on here were part of that class. And, we had small things like the person that was helping us to navigate in the metro, right? So even just small things like that, I think what you really have to do, and this is why I cited Ella Baker, is really understand that young people are equipped to lead themselves, right? They don't need us in the way that we think that they need us. Our goal is really to just, like Ella Baker said, give light, and the people will find a way. I read someplace the other day, the purpose of mentoring is not to form someone into your own image. The purpose of mentoring is to help someone form themselves into who they want to be. So that's really my philosophy when it comes to that and bridging those gaps. And quickly, I also was very well mentored myself. My mentor is a professor at Columbia University now, Farah Jasmine Griffin. And, I named one of my daughters after her. And I think that I've heard stories of women, particularly women, that go both ways. So some people, they had amazing mentors, so they want to pay it forward. But some people had terrible mentors. And so they're trying to be what they did not have.
Mm. So Talia, as you think about, you're a 21st century woman. When you think about chatting with other people from 20th century, it's almost like decades away. What do you think you need? What would you say to people that are trying to mentor someone like you, or you even thinking about mentoring a person that is younger?
I think it's important to realize that this relationship, this interaction is multi-directional. As a mentee, you learn a lot from your mentor, but, also being someone in the 21st century and like having these conversations that weren't ever had before and learning about new information that's coming up, you have a lot to teach your mentor as well. And I think that's something that, our generation isn't afraid of calling out and naming, like, yes, you can teach me, yes, you can guide me, but I also have something to offer you. I think that's one of the most important things about having this intergenerational conversation.
Are there other thoughts? I see a lot of head nodding, agreement. Yes.
I would like to add on to what Talia said. I think it's also just important to feel like as a like she said, like a mentee, to feel like you do have an agency and you are being listened to. And I feel like being a person that came from like BPS, a school that was really underfunded, there wasn't really a lot of resources. And so like Professor said, I really didn't have mentors until I got to college. Like I had one like senior year that helped me throughout my college process, but it just took so long for me to have that. So I feel like coming from like an underprivileged, underdeveloped school, it's just important. Since I've never felt like I had any agency or I could contribute to anything higher than my education and what I was doing for myself. The importance of having mentors is knowing like an amazing mentor is just realizing them giving me a sense of agency and knowing that I'm also like my words are being listened to and I have an impact on somebody that has achieved so much already. And that's very powerful to me. And it's helped me also know that I could become a woman that could be that for others in the coming future.
Bilgisa, I'm so happy you mentioned the fact that you are a BPS student and you're one of our bright stars. And thank you. That brings up for me, for so long, United Way has focused on this issue of mentoring, but actually not from an asset base, right? It's really trying to show people, look over here, what's better. And I'm really delighted to hear you talk about this issue of how do you bring your agency? How does this person help to develop you? And also, I'm curious from Grace, from your point of view, when we think about this issue of mentoring, how does intersectionality comes into play? Because we have a lot of cross-racial mentoring. We have people coming from various backgrounds. This is a world city now. We don't all come from the same roots. So what would you offer as a recommendation as we think about the intersectionality of race and gender, but also ethnicity?
I think oftentimes people try to adopt this rhetoric of colorblindness, but I think that that also extends to blindness in any other ways. But I think that when I look at those intersections with mentorship, it's important to acknowledge those things and, you know, have those uncomfortable conversations. And when I look at intersectionality, it's about, you know, understanding the paradigms that, you know, have existed. And oftentimes those paradigms are subconscious, the things that, you know, we've internalized because of, you know, what the world has taught us, the things that we've internalized because the experiences that we've had, whether it's, you know, more success and you're looking at academia, you're looking at helping students get to the corporate space, you're looking at students get to law, across different industries, across, you know, different points of success. And so I think it starts for both the mentor and the mentee. And if you want to adopt a more intersectional lens of, you know, looking at the world and looking at these social issues and how to solve them within one another, it's really getting real about the paradigms that you may already have, that, you know, you kind of look through, exist, and operate in the world. And I think that's one thing I've noticed in a lot of my work with Gen Z is, you know, breaking these things down and kind of having more of a self-awareness about the way that things have always been, but then also this ideal of, you know, the world that can be. I think another part to that is also transnationalism that, like, we've really talked about, is really looking at, you know, there are more interests than exists so much outside of our communities. And I know you talked about, you know, like, look over here, like these things are better as well. But I think it's also about affirming, you know, that person and affirming capital in a lot of other ways. And I think that's one thing that's often like lacking when you look at BLM and you look at Me Too, is that, like, these students have, you know, these young people, they have their own form of social capital. It may not be social capital and agency in the sense that it is for the rest of the world or for the systems and the institutions that they're facing, but there is beauty there is intelligence there is capital there is something worthy of them bringing. So I think it starts with, one, reinforcing that, but also, you know, assessing and breaking down whatever paradigms that may have existed to adopting a more transnational approach.
I really, really love that. And that transnational approach of how you're bringing that back into the space. How do you bring it with joy? How do you bring it with love? But Latifa, one of the things that you mentioned, that when you try to even think about yourself and unpacking yourself, then your other identity came into play, right? Of being a Muslim, and what does that mean? So how do we help when adults are not only thinking about how they're breaking down themselves, but how do we help, again, keep this view global, but also be able to bring in the I would say the spiritual aspect, and understanding that your spirituality may not be like my spirituality. And how do we bring that together? How do we unite that?
That's an amazing question. I think it really starts off with educating ourselves. So when we think of the term intersectionality, I think oftentimes people have begun to misuse the term and look at intersectionality as an identity. But Kimberly Crenshaw says no, intersectionality is not an identity. It's a framework. It's a lens. It helps us discuss power structures and the ways in which they are in conversation with one another. Where as a Black African Muslim woman, I'm looking at the ways in which racism, patriarchy, and Islamophobia are creating a multiplicative effect on my oppression. So intersectionality is not additive, it's multiplicative. And I think once I began that process of unpacking all of those different structures, I began to realize, okay, I do feel a void, and I'm trying to fill in this void of being over involved and getting into these sort of different extracurricular activities. But none of that was fulfilling me because my cup was empty, and that I wasn't starting my journey of loving myself. But when taking the course #Black Lives Matter Me Too and understanding intersectionality, it helped me realize, okay, I didn't know what self-love was. But then through looking at the term and reading the works that we were presented, I then was able to begin on this journey of self-love. So when we speak of mentorship, especially to youth who have multiple identities such as I, or when we speak of mentorship to Black girls grow up feeling invisible. They grow up feeling worthless. And I think mentorship, once you understand the term intersectionality, when you speak of mentorship, you then will find ways to instill affirmation within Black girls, where they grow up feeling that they're capable of taking over the world, and where they feel worthy, and where they feel that they matter. So when taking the course hashtag Black Lives Matter meets hashtag Me Too, we were learning about Rosa Parks, where no, Rosa Parks was not just tired on that bus. Actually, Rosa Parks was a part of the underground press. Actually, Rosa Parks was helping Reese Taylor around her rape and assault, and helping to fight for Reese Taylor. We were learning about Ida B. Wells. We were learning about Assata Shakur, and the different ways in which Black women have always been revolutionary. So when you take a step back to educate ourselves and look at the different ways in which structures work together to erase people, when you go back to educating ourselves, you then find ways to censor the voices of the marginalized. And I appreciate you bringing up this idea of connection and community, when it comes to spirituality, because as a Muslim in America, I oftentimes have felt that Blackness has become synonymous to the Christian faith. So I've had to ask myself, well, where do I fall within the Black Lives Matter movement? Where is my position? And I think it starts with rejecting the binary. We live in a society that perpetuates this Black-white binary, where we forget the gray area. We forget about Black queer people. We forget about Black trans women. We forget about the disabled, Black Muslims. The list continues to go on. So I think rejecting the binary and really examining what intersectionality means is where we can find love, community across different ethnic, racial, religious lines.
And isn't that the place we want to be, right? But we got to see it to believe it. We got to be able to imagine it. We have to be able to have someone show us a roadmap. And as I'm thinking about what you're saying, there's so many people on this webinar today who may work with youth, right? Or may be program managers that you're speaking to, and may not be able to quite make that leap. And one of the things that I think about, we've talked a lot about women, but there are people that have grown up in an environment of toxic masculinity, right? Where this rape culture piece is very, very real. So as you think through, even as Black women, we're kind of like at that space of all of this. What advice would you have for community leaders, people who are working with you, and really unpacking, but also replacing their notions around this whole issue of rape culture, and particularly toxic masculinity and how it leads to that? I'm going to let anyone take that.
I can share really quickly, and
Sure.
then anyone else who wants to add on. Since freshman year, I have said that if everybody in the world could take from where Black Lives Matter to Me Too, that the world would be a better place. Because it teaches you everything that you need to know to like navigate the world and like deal with community and be one with community. I think the issue is that these conversations we have these conversations with young women, young Black women, but they're not being had with Black men. And if they are being had, they are being sugar coated, like you can't do this, but boys will be boys. Or they have these conversations and then they turn around and then turn on their radio, and all the music that they're listening to has misogyny in it, or they're turning on their TV and what they're watching enforces sexism or colorism or racism. And so I think having these conversations and being explicit and being and having young men acknowledge their positionality in this conversation is very important, because yes, we have these conversations with Black women, and Black women often carry the weight, carry the knowledge, carry the education. Then it's the Black woman's job to educate the Black man or to call out the Black man. But I think we're getting to a point where it shouldn't be our job anymore. It should be the job of the Black community, and then eventually the job of everybody, no matter what race. It shouldn't be on the plate of the oppressed for us to educate you. I think the conversation just has to start. It needs to be explicit. It needs to be honest, so that we can all put our hands in the mud and do the work.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I would say, you know, I approach this question from two vantage points. You know, first, obviously, you know, as a professor, but also as a mother. And I was raised in a household I was the youngest of 4 daughters, but I have 2 sons and 2 daughters. And I really believe that the work has to begin from the time the children are in utero, right? And so we talk to our children about consent from when they're very young. We talk to them. You know, I talk to my boys about feminism and that my desires for them all to identify as feminists. We talk about inequality. We talk about social justice. We have very open conversations in our household about these issues. And I have noticed that, you know, on my campus, I have I don't have a lot of male students in most of my classes. My classes are really predominantly women. And so what I entreat the young men who do take my classes to do is to talk to their friends, right? Because they have friends who will never sign up for a class with Professor Jean-Charles, right? They don't want to take feminism. But if their friends are talking to them about it, and that's why, you know, at Boston College, we also have the bystander program through the Women's Center, which is wonderful. And some of these women are a part of it. But that's the thing. You get the people that are like-minded and that are invested, and then they talk to the people who they might be in relationship with, they're more proximate to, but might not care about the cause in the same way. And I think that will go further to transform hearts and minds.
I think that's amazing. You know, one of the last things that last question as we're running out of time that I wanted to bring to this forefront that you two have really imparted with me, whose responsibility is it, right? It's all of our responsibility to make this happen. So even when we bring this back center to Me Too and Black Lives Matter and the intersection, you know, how do we help people understand that affirming Black Lives Matter and affirming Me Too does not diminish white lives, other lives, or all lives? How do we help people understand and embrace this work? And what is the role of philanthropy in embracing this?
I would say really quickly to know that educational reform and to reform our society and our communities can also be interpersonal. Because I think that when people look at those things, they think, oh, like this is such a huge challenge because we have to change systems and we have to change institutions and all these things. But to know that it can be interpersonal, right? To just say Me Too, to just, you know, affirm somebody and know that, you know, they hear you, they understand you. And so I think that when we kind of get to a more interpersonal level of understanding these issues, and we look less at, you know, just the politics of it or just like the ideologies that exist, is knowing that, you know, all these things can be interpersonal, and knowing that, you know, where you can start is just by education. And so I remember I had a mentor in middle school that told me about like Audre Lorde and the master's tools cannot, you know, rebuild the master's house. And I didn't really understand what that meant. Like now that I'm able to more critically understand Audre Lorde and her work and be able to appreciate it, I always knew that because that was a seed that was planted that will only continue to grow. And so to know that, you know, a lot of Bell Hooks' work has been dedicated to making issues of Black feminism and sexism and patriarchy more accessible to people, and knowing that you can read it. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, to know that a lot of her work is, you know, books that I've given to my little sister, you know, Dear Ajawale, a feminist manifesto that I've given to her, you know, how to be a feminist to read, and she's at 14. And so to know that, you know, it can really start because we have the tools to do so. And these tools are not very expensive because, you know, you can find them online. You can find works of Bell Hooks, you know, her All About Love books. You can find PDFs on that online. So there are ways for us to start doing that, but it really starts with knowing that, you know, it's interpersonal. If I can affect one person and thus they can affect another and another, and this can become a conversation, the work that starts there is just as important than us having, you know, thousands of people on a platform to discuss the same things.
I think you just wrapped this all up really well.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes, you may.
She definitely did. But I just
She
want to
did
say,
drop the mic.
I do want to say she definitely did wrap it up perfectly, but I just want to add to chime in specifically for the people, the philanthropy piece. I think that, you know, we have seen how Black Lives Matter and Me Too have both benefited from philanthropy, but this intersection, the idea of funding the work of Black women and girls, of survivors, I just want to make a huge plug for the Black Girl Freedom Fund. The goal is to raise $1 billion for Black girls and young women, just like the women that you see before us here, to raise $1 billion within the next within the next 10 years. And so I just want to make a plug for the Black Girl Freedom Fund, 1 billion for blackgirls.org, which I think is a great way. You know, we see that people aren't funding the intersection as much, and what a change it would make to our world if we were able to get $1 billion for Black girls for the next 10 years. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. And with that, I have to say thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jean-Charles. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Latifa. Thank you, Talia. Thank you, Bilgesia. And thank you, United Way. This has been an amazing conversation. Each and every one of you have, I hope your pen is burning up. You've had lots of books and resources that have been given to you. This conversation, this intersectional, but also intergenerational conversation, I think has really been inspiring, and how we can think about really coming together, not on a more united front, and really pushing us to a united way for collective good for all. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to my friend Karen Gross-Horn, Senior Director at United Way, to join us for our closing thoughts. Karen.
Thank you, Bethia. Thank you so much. Tremendous gratitude and appreciation to Regine, Dr. Jean-Charles, her students, to Bethia. I just am so warmed. I never could have imagined, what started as, would you like to do a webinar for us, would end up so powerfully impactful. I'm overwhelmed. So with that, thank you all for being with us on our launch of this important diversity, equity, inclusion series. As we continue on our journey within ourselves and our organization, we hope you will continue with us in the coming months as we plan our series in March for Women's History Month, in April for our DEI and STEM work, and looking into May on equity and our homelessness initiatives in May. And I'm going to find some way to make this intergenerational. I mean, the power of that was really profound. So we might be onto something there. There will be a survey, so please let us know by your survey response any topics of interest for future planning as we move forward in this work that is at the core of the United Way. I'm reminded of this quote from Maya Angelou: "The need for change bulldozed a road down the center of my mind." We hope you will be with us on the road to learn, grow, and bring change together. United for Justice. Thank you.